Fast Money. We're live at the Nasdaq market site at New York's Times Square. U.S. stocks surging today after a speech by Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke signaling the central bank is committed to accommodative monetary policy. So will this give the rally more momentum? Let's bring in Peter Schiff, CEO of Europe Pacific Capital. Now, Peter, we generally know where you stand, but the statement that seemed to stand out to me the most this time around is that you actually believe that what the Fed is going to do, and that is keep rates extremely low, will actually create another housing bubble. To what degree? How big would this bubble be?
I'm not saying it's going to create another housing bubble. It's facilitating the big bubble in government spending. It's the Federal Reserve printing all this money that's enabling the government to finance these huge deficits, and it's preventing the economy from restructuring. You know, in his speech this morning, Ben Bernanke talked about structural unemployment. Well, the structural unemployment is the result of interest rates being too low, and the fact that rates are too low, we're not saving enough, we're not investing enough, we're consuming too much. Government is spending too much, and all of this has the economy out of balance. And until it restructures, we're not going to create lasting, productive jobs.
Hey, Peter, it's Brian Kelly. So what I'm curious about is we get rates that go higher. The banks in the U.S. hold just a ton of treasuries at this point, almost a bubble in that. So if rates go higher, they lose money on that treasury portfolio and they don't want to lend anymore. So wouldn't we want to keep rates even?
Yeah, well, that's why the Fed didn't ask the banks to stress test a big drop in the bond market, because that's what's coming, and the banks would fail that. But, you know, you got Ben Bernanke. Look at what he said last week. On Thursday, he gave a lecture to students at George Washington University, and he basically absolved the Federal Reserve of any responsibility for the housing bubble. He basically said that interest rates have nothing to do with housing prices, which is absurd, because right now the Fed is keeping interest rates artificially low because Bernanke is trying to prop up the housing market. He's trying to prevent housing prices from falling. So how is it that interest rates affect home prices now, but they didn't do it when the Fed was inflating the housing bubble? I mean, either Ben Bernanke is lying or he's incompetent.
Peter, over the weekend I had a conversation with someone about the equities market, Bernanke, interest rates, and basically they said to me, well, you've got an equities market that continues to rise on nothing more than election year shenanigans. Do you agree with that, or do you believe that there's some concrete, some substance behind what we're seeing in some of these equity appreciation?
Well, the substance is inflation. I don't think that the equity market is getting more valuable. It's that the dollars that we use to buy equities are losing value. I mean, look at gold prices were up big today. You know, this is not about the stock market going up. It isn't going up. That's an illusion created by the Fed. Our money is losing value. That's why oil prices are rising. And the fact is our money is going to lose a lot more value because the Federal Reserve refuses to allow the economy to restructure, and it refuses to acknowledge its culpability in both inflating the stock market bubble and then inflating the larger real estate bubble and now inflating a bigger bubble in the bond market and government spending. The Fed is the biggest enemy of this economy. In fact, Ben Bernanke, as far as I'm concerned, he's public enemy number one. He is helping to destroy this country. The sooner we can remove him from office, the better, because we're never going to have a recovery while this guy's in charge.
Hey, Pete, I happen to agree with a lot of you saying public enemy number one notwithstanding. So what are going to be the unintended, and they're clearly all unintended consequences a year, 18 months, 2 years from now? Because what you're saying, this could be worse than 08, 09.
Oh, it is going to be. Absolutely going to be. I mean, because the Fed is creating more damage now than it did when it blew up the housing bubble. The problem is going to be eventually the world is going to figure out that the government is lying about inflation. Inflation is a much bigger problem than the CPI numbers show. Look at General Mills last week showing that their input costs are up 10, 11% a year. That's a more accurate reflection of inflation. Once the world realizes that inflation is running out of control in the U.S. and the Fed will do nothing about it, because if the minute the Fed takes this punch bowl away, the minute it raises interest rates sufficiently to cut off the inflation, the banks are going to fail, the federal government's going to have to declare bankruptcy, it's not going to be able to pay the interest on the national debt. This whole phony economy that the Fed has constructed with cheap money is going to come toppling down. But the reality is we have to kill this phony economy because it's unsustainable. We need to replace it with a viable one, but unfortunately to do that, there's a lot of short-term pain because we got to unwind this bubble. And the Fed doesn't want that to happen.
Right.
The Fed is letting our politicians off the hook. It's trying to postpone the day of reckoning till after the next election. But there's always another election coming. We got to deal with these problems. We can't keep making them worse. That's what we did when the stock market bubble burst, and we created the real estate bubble.
Point taken,
but we
Peter.
learned nothing from our mistakes. All we do is repeat them, but on a grander scale.
Sounds like Peter's running for office again.
Peter, it is always great to get your point of view on the show. We appreciate your time. Peter Schiff of Euro Pacific Capital. All right, so, you know, Peter's views are probably at the more extreme end of the typical views that we have on, but the points are here that,
well
that
taken, and he's 100%. His points are spot on. I mean, now Pete would admit he's a polarizing figure, which is one of the reasons I think people don't want to, they don't want to listen, because a lot of things he says, frankly, you don't want to hear.
Right.
The reality is, and Pete would probably admit this as well, this stock market can continue to go up in the face of that. But when it ends, and I think people would agree with this, it's going to end poorly. So what we try to do every night is point out things that are interesting on a day-to-day basis. But Pete's talking about things structurally that are going to come to fruition at some point. I just don't know when that is.
But in terms of his prediction, though, of a crash that will be worse than what we saw in 2008, I would think that many people here would totally disagree with that. That is not.
I would totally
anywhere
disagree with it. But it is true that by inflating these bonds as much as they have, the people that are the last ones stuck when that music stops, they will hurt a lot when that happens.
All right, coming up next on Fast, will the big winners of the first quarter be the big losers of the second? Plus, is the greenback comeback already over? Got your money in motion trade straight ahead. Much more Fast coming up next.
I was stunned by reading a statement you made in the banking committee on September 10th, 2003. In fact, I reprinted the whole thing in my book. I want Americans who hear leaders saying every day, we could have never seen this coming. This was a shock. How did this happen? I want to read what you said 5 years before the collapse. The special privileges granted to Fannie and Freddie have distorted the housing market by allowing them to attract capital that they could not attract under pure market conditions. Like all artificially created bubbles, the boom in housing prices cannot last forever. When housing prices fall, homeowners will experience difficulty as their equity is wiped out. Furthermore, the holders of the mortgage debt will also have a loss. These losses will be greater than they would have otherwise been had government policy not actively encouraged overinvesting in housing. And you go on to say, because so many people will invest in housing, the damage will be catastrophic. Congressman, how could it be that you knew this on the banking committee in 2003 and nobody else did until after the collapse?